Hey you, I'm Andy Powell. Welcome to the Allcast Podcast. No topic is off the table. I hope you enjoy. So, well, cool, man. Let's crack these beers and go down the rabbit hole, I suppose.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you for doing this.
Likewise, Matt. Thanks for having me. I'm never got to talk in this kind of format, so I'm really grateful for it. Usually most people are like, get a little too much of it and then they get sick of it.
Yeah, people have short attention spans. But this kind of information is like, how many people do you meet that like really know this kind of stuff?
I don't know. There's not a lot of people who get into the economics of things. Most of the time people go into conspiracies. And though there's like, a lot of validity behind that, the reality is like everything that happens in your life is dictated by economics, whether you like it or not. And that's why the hippie stuff is kind of goofy, because they're like, well, you can just manifest a better life or just think positive thoughts. And I'm all about the power of positivity, and I understand how like that really does like generate like value in your life and reality. But it's, how do you say that to like starving people in third world countries?
Yeah,
and
they're going to tell you to get right, kick rocks. I've been thinking about that my whole life.
Well, the propaganda, like the unspoken narrative in U.S. society is that like we're all just embarrassed millionaires. Those people just need to work harder and then they can become Jeff Bezos's, not realizing that the entire system and structure is like built and organized a certain way. It's not entirely controlled, but it's like its own it's its own organism, and it really does. It created a brand new class of capitalism, which you could argue isn't capitalism anymore, but you could argue it either way. It doesn't really matter to me. I call it capitalism because it's called finance capitalism, and that's what we all use as a general term. So I just say that, it's not.
But it's like a warped version of the original American dream that most people think of when they hear capitalism. Oh, work hard and you'll be rewarded.
Well, like George Carlin said, it's called the American dream because you gotta be asleep to believe it.
Ha.
So yeah, it's all warped out, and but to me, it's also you can say that finance capitalism is an extension of capitalism, or you cannot. It doesn't matter.
So what's the difference?
Finance capitalism is basically an entire con, whereas capitalism is meant to be off of market values and production and industrialization. So, and like goods and services and commodities and resources. So kind of the capitalism is you should have a private markets, and people can exchange on the markets throughout the world, and there's value chains in there like oil.
So there's two different things I think of when you say private markets.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is like private individuals, like a person doing what they want in their personal life. That kind of private, meaning it's not commercialized, it's not a company or corporation. And then the other version would be private, meaning inaccessible markets. No.
Like think of it as private as in like J.P. Morgan or like John Rockefeller.
Mm-hmm.
It's a democratic, it's a liberal democracy. I don't know necessarily what that has to do with the economic system, but they politicize the economic system through liberal democracy. And so they say, hey, the Bush family owned the oil under the ground. They got it all. They made a bunch of money, and then they were able to go buy some more resources in another country. So that's the private market. Landlord class, I just saw stats that like 50% of the American population doesn't own any stock, 0.06. The other 50% own, I can't remember, but the top 1% owns almost entirely all of the stock, shared with like a 10% of the remaining 50% invested in our population. But private market is just exactly that. You start your own business, and let's say it turns into Amazon, and you go play in the world, and you need money, and you need exchange rates, and you need regulation, and you need to be trading valid currencies, and that's where technically that's capitalism. And then there's a lot of contradictions in capitalism, one of them being that every system has to have regulation no matter what, and this is strict like economic fundamentalism. Governments managing systems that large and markets kind of takes the idea of capitalism away. And so, yeah, I guess technically it's capitalism, but it's not like a free market. That's what it is. It's like capitalism, but the free market ideology kind of goes away the minute you introduce governments into the system.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So an example of if we have like a company example of a free market entity, what would that be? Something that's publicly traded? Like the stocks are publicly traded?
It's just any private company. But yeah, once you hit the stock market, then it becomes its own animal. Because you're in a different value set for a small business, then you go from a small business into something else.
Yeah.
So small businesses usually, labor and small business always make up a significant portion of any economy, even in a deindustrialized economy like ours. But all of the money sits at the top in our system currently. So though there's small business, it's more like private industry basically runs the roost. And that's when people get into conspiracy theories about, well, which people call the shots. Yeah. And that there's been books that have narrowed it down really good. Yeah. I can't think of the one that this stat comes from, but there's 236 people in the world who technically manage tens of trillions of dollars.
Yeah. So like the Bilderberg Group or BlackRock.
Well, the Bilderberg Group is more of, I feel like, a policy institution where it is a meeting for heads of state on down, like government and private business, to get together.
Yeah. So yeah, the top financial people.
Yeah, and then they just kind of discuss what the topics are of the year or how often they meet, and it's institutionalized in a way where it gives State Department people, government people, easy access to the private market, which is kind of the whole political grift in our country, which is, career climbers is you're trying to use your position in government to get yourself your retirement plan when you get out of government into the private sector.
Yeah, okay. So politicians making side money.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
But they make most of their money after they get out, unless it's careerists like Pelosi. So a lot of people, even Obama, made all of his money after he was president.
Okay.
So he made all the deals, bailed out Chase, all the banks, and then he went and did $90,000 to $600,000 speaking fees for banks who were just hosting events.
Yeah, following in suit of the Clintons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they Clintons did that too. Are gnarly though. They were more institutional and were better at grifting.
Yeah. And what is grifting?
Grifting is like skimming off the system. You're using a cause to make money, even though you don't believe in the cause.
Oh, like BLM. Where it's not what they're saying it is, and they're making money from it.
Well, I say BLM was more of a takeover than a grift. Like, BLM started organically and ran organically, and then there was a period where everybody got bought out, and then it went fully corporate.
Interesting.
And then you started seeing like the Soros investments and all these things, and then they all of a sudden had all this great messaging or platform. They were super modern, and it was originally just like a unregulated loose body of people coming together, like Mothers Against Drug Driving or something.
Okay.
In its early stages.
So what's an example of a grift?
I could use a funny one. I don't know how much it'll land with anybody, but there are these fake like leftist liberals named Crystal Ball and Kyle Kalinske. They're married now. And an example of a grift would be like, you hear what they're saying now, and they're telling you that, hey, we think all of you people should vote for Joe Biden because it's better than fascist Trump, and as much as we'd like to do a third party, it's just non-viable. And then you pause it there, and then you go hear what they were saying 2-3 years ago, or when Bernie was running, and they're trying to tell everybody like that the Democratic Party is a waste of time, that putting energy into it is worthless, and you need fundamental change outside of the duopoly. And where they were at in their life versus where they're at now, they got like this big deal and got paid, and then they just turned into these total douchebags.
So I thought Kyle Kalinske was a private investigative reporter.
I mean, I feel like nowadays all he does is just squawk.
I haven't heard him. I don't listen to him regularly, so I don't know. Was he one of the guys that examined the Twitter files after Elon Musk bought Twitter?
That was Matt Taibbi.
Matt Taibbi, okay.
He's a great journalist. I followed him since 2014. I read his first article on the 2008 banking collapse, and it was a super interesting article. And then the next time I started seeing him pop up was when he had Max Blumenthal on from the Gray Zone for a show called Useful Idiots. And Max Blumenthal was just like tearing up the deep state and Israel-Palestine issues. And I was like, wow, this is cool. And I started watching more of Matt Taibbi, and yeah, he's solid. He's a really great journalist.
Cool.
And he got that crack at the Twitter files, which was cool, because I had some friends who were like, oh, I don't know about Matt Taibbi, seems like this or that. And then I'm like, he's done great work his whole life. And then he got the Twitter files, and I was like, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
And he testified in Congress and all that.
Big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about money and government and industry and war profiteering and all these different things that we see, just us regular people look at the screens and we see, oh, this is what's happening now. This is what happened last week. All this crap that we don't know how to tell what's true, what's not. If we go back to when this country, or maybe even before, I don't know, when the money system started and how it developed into where it's at now, on the brink of being a cashless society or using Bitcoin and all this digital stuff, can you kind of describe that evolution?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. An economist I follow religiously, his name's Michael Hudson. He has all of the accolades you could ever want from anybody. He worked for the State Department. He started with Rockefeller at Chase Manhattan. He was their chief balance of payments economist. Has a fascinating life story background. He still is extremely prolific and consults. He's consulted countries all over the world for economics. He started in like 1999 researching the history of money and debt. And he produced some work that then Harvard made him a professor or a colleague or something, and they were organizing an annual meeting with, I think he wrote a book, actually. And so then Harvard and all of these top scholars around the world, anthropologists, linguists, everything would come, and they were going through his book by chapters and checking the authenticity of it and how he analyzed debt. And it was so fascinating because no one had analyzed debt in the ancient world and how economies work. Essentially, money started out just like on a ledger. So it was like digital, but scratches on a wall, scratches on a tablet. And that's how they would settle debts when the harvests came. And then metals created certain value exchanges for different things. You could buy like beer and stuff.
Do you have a loose timeline or location of this type of?
Yeah, sure. This would be anywhere from like 2000 to 7000 BC.
Okay.
So like the birth of civilization. And a lot of this was mostly happening in Egypt and Iraq and Iran and Syria.
Yeah.
And everybody in between. Fertile Crescent. So Michael Hudson started doing, and he published his book recently as a 3-part series. I think the first one's called The Death of Antiquity. But what he does is he's able to show that money in the commodity markets of like normal exchanges didn't create societal debt, but actually debt was produced from things like famines and like bad crop years. Like you borrow money, go plant all your seed, and then get no water that year, and then you have a debt. And they had these structures in ancient civilizations. They were called palace states. They were run by a king. Every time a new king would come into rule, they would do a debt jubilee and wipe all of the debts. Because it was the palace, essentially the state, that held all of the debt. And what this does, though, is because there's middlemen in the process, that's where you get things kind of like usury. It's not like usury's bad, but like usury, like a middleman maybe will take out I couldn't say exactly in ancient society. Michael Hudson could if you read his book, but takes out a loan from the palace state and middlemans it to the farmer, and then the farmer kind of actually owns the bank essentially, and then the bank repays the palace state.
So the middleman,
the issuer of money.
Okay, so it's like a fee for the service that he's doing.
Right.
Okay.
And so what happens is like structures of hierarchy get built in those systems, and if the king didn't do a debt jubilee, the simple principle of money is one person's debt is another person's savings. And so if you can show, which Hammurabi and on could show, they actually held good records. Most all of this debt was held from bad debt, or not bad debt, like weather or bad crops or things of these natures. So they would dump the debt on the back end every time a new king would come in, and there's a debt jubilee, and everybody would not have to repay their debts, and they would do a reset.
So they would reset because these debts had been acquired from situations or circumstances that were out of control of the individuals carrying the debt.
That's what Michael Hudson's proved in the ancient world.
Okay, whereas today, if you have a bunch of debt, it's because you went and applied for a line of credit, and then they gave it to you, and you did it all on your own volition and application.
Maybe. I mean, I feel like everybody's forced into debt in our society. It's how that structure works. And we can get into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But so they would do these debt resets and debt forgivenesses. And it was such an important theme in ancient Mesopotamia that it was written in the center of Levitical law in the Bible, which got that structure from ancient civilizations like the Babylonians and such. And so for the longest time in human civilization, there would be debt forgiveness. Here's one of the reasons why. If you don't forgive the debt and you're a king, then you're holding the debt, so the bank owes you, and then the farmers owe the bank. Well, what's happening though is like the bank's accruing interest. And so what Mike Hudson showed is that compound interest, like on debt, is insurmountably climbs faster than production in a society. So if I owe you at 2% and then it doubles and then it doubles and it's these doubling factors, then all of a sudden I'm debt captured, can't repay you, and no matter how hard I work, I'll never be able to get out of it. Production in a society can't match compounding debt. It just can't.
Mm-hmm.
So who holds the note? And if you don't forgive the note in the palace state, then what you're doing is you're creating a class of citizens who get to hold the note and hold the power. And so it would create an oligarchy in your society. And the last thing you want as a king is an oligarchy, because they got rich enough to afford a private military, a mercenary army. They got rich enough to have lots of influence in your society. And eventually these oligarchies would take over the palace state and destroy it. So debt forgiveness is fundamental in the balance of a society to prevent an oligarchy.
Fascinating. Do you know of a country or a specific kingdom that took place in? The oligarchy rose up and overtook the palace state?
Yeah, Greece and Rome.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that gets you into the next phase of humanity, actually, in economics. That's like of real value, is that Rome was the first society to hold the debts, and there's so much history there. But they decided, the oligarchy got so powerful that it said, hey, we're not forgiving the debts, we're going to hold the debts, and everyone will just owe us. And then I think Caesar tried to forgive the debts, and then he got assassinated, and then repeating emperors tried to forgive the debts, and they all got assassinated. And it threw Rome into the Dark Ages. So that really created the Western world, was Rome, like Europe mostly. And because they held the debts, they blacked out. And then you got feudalism. And then you go from feudalism into capitalism. Then from capitalism into socialism, and then socialism into communism.
What is feudalism?
Feudalism was, there was a king, and then there was landlords. And maybe the king didn't matter so much, but the landlords essentially owned all the land. And people had nowhere to go, so they would live on the land, and they would work the land, and essentially it would balance out at the end of every year that they didn't make any money, but they got fed. So you just work your whole life.
Mm-hmm. Just to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. Well, what's the concept now is called neo-feudalism. So,
AKA new feudalism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Neo-new.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went from the oligarchies to the feudalism, and then that moved toward capitalism.
Yeah, capitalism is like what brought us out of feudalism.
How?
I don't know the exact history on this. I haven't actually spent any time on the feudalism, the capitalism movement. But essentially what happened was, it's the small business economy that started giving people the ability to kind of have their own monetary sovereignty. I'm sure there was like a lot of revolutions that happened to make that happen. But then you had people owning their own property, maybe. I don't know too much about it, but having their own job essentially, instead of just like their job was this, what do they call them? You know, serf, living on landlords' land all the time. So maybe capitalism had something to do with giving people a piece of property. One of the jacked up things that I just remembered like a few months ago that I learned in like 8th grade was that there's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'm pretty sure where that came from is actually supposed to be life, liberty, and property. Growing out of feudalism, you have a right to a piece of property. Like you don't have to ever be a serf again. But I feel like it got changed to be pursuit of happiness intentionally.
Could be. So feudalism goes to capitalism, and I guess looking at other countries that are currently socialist or communist, does every society go through that order of money phases until they get to communism, or do some of them just implement it as is?
No, because they still do debt forgiveness in other parts of the countries as of like before and after Rome. Countries don't have to go through those cycles and systems to get to where we're at today. Essentially, the way Michael Hudson explains it is that after Rome, from the democracy that was really just a huge autocracy and oligarchy holding the debt, split the Western world and put it on a completely different path of economics than the rest of the world. It's amazing to think that we've been living off of a split, off of a diversion of what we've naturally created and what has been the most popular type of economic systems, which are like debt forgiveness. And so by holding the debt, it fractured the West from a traditional economics.
Interesting. Okay. So money starts out, there's debt forgiveness, and then we split off once we finally get to capitalism. Small businesses, people creating products and services, people have financial sovereignty. We can make our own money, trade freely.
Yeah, blacksmith. Maybe I bought my own shop. Maybe I own a shop, and like the kingdom isn't so flexed out on the landlord class anymore. Now they're just playing global economics and their empire, and they start creating a market, and they start looking at this market and trades and services all around the world, and they go colonize another part of the world, like get the goods for cheap through violence, and then manage how they're going to make the most money off of those goods so it could come back to their economy or go to a different economy as foodstuffs to keep those slaves working while they're creating another plantation crop to then come back to the market here that causes your population to be more well-fed, more industrialized, higher production levels, higher quality production. You know, you're building the engine, and now everybody needs the engine. You know, like the steam engine that was the first industrial revolution or second or something.
Okay.
Things like that. You're priming your society. And so capitalism created like markets like that. And then of course the empire started using those markets immediately.
So when they started to use, do you know about when, as far as like historical record goes, when we as people started to use precious metals as the common denominator or the thing to trade for value, instead of when we went from like bartering to like, okay, you have 2 pieces of silver or whatever, and that represents this amount of value?
I don't know. Maybe sometime around like Hammurabi, like which I could be wrong, like 5,000, 7,000 BC.
Okay.
It's by the time I think like physical money, but it was kind of for really small stuff. I don't think any of it was settling big transactions.
So just like our food today, the younger generation and even some of our generation is pretty disconnected from what money is and where it comes from. We know we all have to use it and it has to be a part of our lives to some capacity, because obviously you need to eat, you need to pay your mortgage or whatever it is that you have. You have to acquire things and trade things. So that's how we know of money today, and it's mostly paper, but now it's moving toward digital. We're already so far removed from its origins of value. Like, it used to be said that Fort Knox held all the gold that backs all the dollars in the United States and in the world. And I think the general consensus is probably that that's not the case anymore. Speaking in just the West, when did the dollar become a paper note rather than an actual solid piece of metal?
You know, I don't know too much about the history of like U.S. currency up until like World War I, World War II. I know that two major companies basically started this country. It was like the Virginia Company and the Massachusetts Bay Company, and it was like heroin and slave trading. I've heard that it was like tobacco, but it's heroin. And heroin money funded the first railroad and the first college, like Yale or something. Like, did a bunch of stuff. Roosevelt was, FDR was heroin money family. But, you know, there was like loose organization around the banking structure. You had wildcat banks everywhere because companies around after the Louisiana Purchase were creating their own money and, you know, paying their employees in that money. And you can only use that money for their company store that they had on the tent city for mining or whatever.
Oh man, that sucks.
Yeah, and so like it's just a series of regulations, and there's a lot of story and influencers and systems that got us to where we were at. You had, so I'll jump in on one thread, since we're like at the 1850s right now, and this will be good to remember later. In economics in the 19th century, let's just say the 1850 in the middle, there was industrialization and the first industrial revolution. You had basically a resource and commodity driven market, industrialized market. The people who were the rich people were railroad barons, arms manufacturing, tobacco, hot money as drug money, and something else. But
so drugs, guns, and transportation, much like today.
And then like ones. Global markets and stuff. Like obviously tobacco is not, it's grown here, but a ton of it is always grown in the South. Gold exploration still valuable, but key industry kind of ran the world in a bit of the way. They had such strong pull, and so what they were trying to convince the bankers of was lend to the federal government and make the government socialized. So we need to keep, it was a different value of economic principles than we have now. It's called traditional classical economics, or like what does Mike Hudson call it? It's essentially classical economics in the classical period. It was people like Ricardo, a couple other people that slipped my mind, Adam Smith, were arguing for socialism before it was called socialism. What they wanted was to keep labor low, to keep your hourly wage low, and for the state to step in and provide roads, schools, hospitals, infrastructure, parks, whatever, for the citizens, so that way they could afford to work for a low wage, like $10 an hour, and I can live on $10 an hour because most of the things around me as essential needs are free or really cheap. And if you have a low paid labor class, then you're more competitive on the global market, because your product, let's say 30% of your product cost is in labor. So if you can lower that labor, then, or keep it low, then your product comes out at this cost. And if you can keep labor low, you can guarantee that cost. And as fluctuations happen in other parts of the world for the same product, you can keep a stable cost on your product and guarantee that low rate for your product. And so it was classical economics, because that's kind of how it worked, was still observing regular market standards and trade principles and rules. And not that there wasn't a ton of corruption, but essentially that's why Marx came up with the ideas he did, on top of like watching all the labor strife, was like
Karl Marx.
Was like, he had nothing wrong with capitalism. He critiqued it a bunch, but he was like, cool, capitalism got us out of feudalism, and now industrialized socialism is going to bring us out of capitalism, because in capitalism, now instead of the landlords, it's the bosses. And so how do people then collective bargain to where they have safe working conditions, they're getting paid well, they get what they want? Because in capitalism, it's turning into the boss makes all the money, everybody gets paid the same. And one of the contradictions in capitalism is that it creates monopolies. So it's just inherent in the system to create monopolies. That's why you need regulations and other things.
How so? Did you have like an example of?
Yeah, like like a simple one would be like I live in a really small community of 1,000 people, and
no, I mean like a real world example. Can you point at something that is started in capitalism but then became a monopoly?
Perfect real world example of monopoly is 4 companies own all the media.
Yeah.
6 companies own all the arms manufacturing or subsidiaries of it.
Just to push back a little bit on that, it's like that's not a monopoly. But I get what you're saying, where all of the power is held by a few. But the technical definition of a monopoly is one individual or one company owning the entire thing, right?
Like a board.
Okay.
Like a board of people who own whether you get gas or not, because you don't have an option to buy gas from somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good example, the gas. So those bigger industries.
If you didn't want to pay Unisource, then where else are you going to go?
Yeah. Nowhere.
Nowhere.
Yeah, in our region, Unisource is the one that supplies the natural gas, and there's no other option here.
So don't cross them. And that's kind of the neo-feudalistic aspect of that transaction. It's not a landlord anymore, it's the energy company.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Right on. So how does capitalism create monopolies? Or are you saying that it creates the opportunity for monopolies?
I think it's the capitalism creates competition, and so you're always just going to take out your competition. It's part of the game. And so your goal is to keep taking out the competition. And if you want to keep expanding into different fields of economics, sure, let's buy Disney. Let's buy like that pharmaceutical company. These creations are making so much money, and they need to move that money. Like, money always has to be moved. It can't stay. So they're going to go buy something else that has a certain investment, and they're either going to liquidate its assets, and that's financial capitalism, or they're going to ride off of its stock values, which is also finance capitalism. And if the company isn't producing that high of a yield anymore, then they're going to liquidate it, which started kind of in the 80s, 82.
Well, one good thing about being in a capitalistic society right now, when you do have 4 companies that own all the media, is that we still have the ability to create our own stuff. Now, we can use social media, but we're seeing that they're taking liberties against us as people to silence or censor what we do. You can see that all the time if you follow certain people who are, they're not even controversial, but they're being made to be controversial because of the overall narrative. It's threatening to the people that are in power, the people that are in control. But one example would be like, okay, I have this podcast. I have the opportunity to buy all the equipment, do it all myself, put it on the internet. Anybody who has internet access can get this. Even if they don't have Spotify, eventually it's going to be, okay, you go to www.whatever, and then you can get to this thing. And that's my own media source. So that's the good thing, is that even though these people they're screwing themselves over ultimately, the 4 big ones that own all the media, because they're consistently lying and doing all these things that are against themselves. Once people start to catch wind, it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to, I don't watch CNN anymore. I don't watch anything anymore. And a lot of people are like that. So that's one good thing, that there's like breathing room within this structure of capitalism for us to be able to relocate that power back into the hands of the many, at least as far as the media goes. When you have something else like an actual resource, like the energy companies, that's a different story, because then you have to own the land, you have to have equipment, you have to, the demand for it is no longer there. Like we were talking about the gas company. If we only have one option, one person to pay to get our natural gas, to heat our water, to heat our house, okay, well, that doesn't really allow for much of a demand. Like, okay, I need to pay someone else because these people are charging too much. But there's no opening. There's no way that I could go start a gas company and start to move natural gas.
That'd be very hard for anybody to, even the richest person in the state.
Yeah.
Part and parcel out what you said about how capitalism gives you the ability to do the podcast. I would say that's actually because we live in a liberal democracy, and that's outside of like markets. You have the right to free speech. That's the value of the liberal democracy that somebody like China doesn't have. We can just talk all the crap we want about our country or our president or anything we want. And
well, I mean more the ability to make money off of media. So that's what I mean, rather than the expression like through the First Amendment.
Okay.
The First Amendment does allow me the ability to produce media to whatever capacity I want to. Mm-hmm. But being able to set up a website, set up a tip jar, whatever the hell, it allows me to make money off of media. Therefore, those 4 major companies aren't getting those dollars.
I'm giving you $5 a month as a subscriber of your podcast, so therefore you're able to make money off me without technically the middleman getting in the way, which is like the government or something like that. And I mean, there's taxes and stuff on that money or whatever, but yeah, it gives you the ability to be money sovereign if people like your product.
Yeah. Well said. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but obviously, like we just talked about with the gas company, that doesn't apply to every industry within the system of capitalism.
And so I'll bring you into the kind of phase that is the ideal, more stable part of capitalism, which is industrialized socialism, which is there's good theory that says you don't privatize any natural monopoly. So like it's always state-run gas or state-run electricity, boards you can vote on, people you can remove, a certain accountability structure. Like usually in a state you have a certain person who's sitting at the desk, and then there's supposed to be someone behind them sitting in a desk. So you can go ask, who made that decision about this thing? You guys caused a wildfire because you didn't keep up on your maintenance.
Yeah.
And so everyone's just like, well, if we need reform, we need it in the state.
What is industrialized socialism? That was the phrase you used?
Yeah.
What is that?
Industrialized socialism is the theory that the industrialists were looking for, that they got for our country, which is included in it is a social safety net, but it's the roads being built, it's the libraries being built, it's the schools being built, the hospitals, to make low-cost living for labor.
Okay.
So the state provides the social safety net and all of the necessities it takes to live life, therefore creating a low-wage economy. So a low-cost economy. There's no one in this economy is making more than $15 an hour. But they don't need to, because they don't go bankrupt from hospital bills. They get education to college, then they get a good job after that, and then this and that and that and this.
So you're saying that industrialized socialism is one facet of our current capitalistic society because we give our taxes to this small group of people that then decide to use it to build roads, etc.? Is industrialized socialism a part of American capitalism?
Yeah, I think it's trended into it, but there's hardly anything left of it anymore at all. I mean, it's basically all got completely wiped out under Clinton. Anything that was left of it. It's gone into full finance capitalism, which is deindustrializing our entire country. So back in the 1850s, when we were building trains and all of these things, that was the platform. And so the economic logic was that, well, industry is just going to keep taking over the world. They're just going to keep building better, and we're just going to keep consuming. We're going to keep, we're going to create a high-speed rail after, coal. We're going to find a better solution, and the hand of the invisible market, it'll balance itself out. These things will be found in this economic system naturally and needed and stuff. And the kind of logic of like where people thought, like Marx thought we were going into, and didn't realize that it would be all shifted after World War II. And then America had the whole bag, the whole 70% of the world's gold America had after World War II. Which was like a poison chalice for America, because it let it become a parasitic empire where even though there's a ton of military conflict in that time, in the course of the last like 80 years, and I could go through so much of it, but like it really became a financialized weapon, and it was able to not make anything, but it got so much money coming in from the world that it was able to feed itself. So it became a parasite and started living off of that. And then you had all this hijinks go on, from gold to fiat, and then from fiat to the crash in the late 70s led to 82, like more financialization and more under Clinton after the East Asian crisis in the late 80s, and then the dot-com crash in 2000, and everything that goes into all that stuff. They're just continually, one of the contradictions in the U.S. system is like it's continually having to change the rules to adapt to the situation to keep the dollar the strongest as it possibly could be. Yeah. So it's like it can get tricky to describe, because sometimes they'll just do the opposite, and they'll just call it the same, like Orwellian.
Oh yeah, they do that all the time with different legislation. So that kind of brings us into BRICS, which I think what you just mentioned, as far as doing whatever it takes to keep the dollar the strongest common denominator of money. But BRICS is Russia, India, China. Who else?
Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
South Africa. Okay, so they're all working together to start to change their money system over to using Chinese money. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's not strictly Chinese money or majorly Chinese money. It's what happened is BRICS got started in like 2008, and it was just BRIC. It was Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And what they started doing is settling global transactions amongst their own currencies outside of the US dollar. So the US dollar is the global financial reserve. And if you want oil, still to this day, you have to buy it in dollars. So there's so much history right there after World War II that you get into with the Bretton Woods Agreement, which ties into BRICS as well. So I'll get into it. But after World War II, the countries were all searching on how, after all these empires had fallen, America had all the money. What kind of new world currency system are we going to have? How are things going to operate? Well, and they couldn't do what they did in World War I, which was let's hold the debts, because that caused depression in Germany so bad that it caused the rise of Hitler. So once again, like holding the debts didn't work out so well. So they said, okay, well, we're gonna hold the debts, but in a different way. And there was two kind of ideologies. One of them was this guy Keynes, and I can't remember his first name. I want to say Richard Keynes, but it's not that. Keynesianism is the type of economics. You'll hear that word get thrown around a lot because like we're in a bit of Keynesianism, but not really. But essentially, what Keynesianism is what he introduced to. He was an Englishman in the conversations on the global system, global financial system. And his idea got presented, which was, hey, let's create a universal currency that like no country prints. We have a central bank that'll print it. And I call it the Bancor. You can call it whatever you want. But what this currency will do is will never get into your or my pockets down below. It's just for settling balance of payments between countries. So Russia shipped this much to China last year, and China only shipped this much to Russia last year, so China owes Russia money back. Does Russia want to call in the debts, or do they hold the Russian currency? It's how normal finances work, because there's such big moving things: agriculture, oil.
So this is a real thing that's currently in use, or is that guy's idea came?
No, it's not in use.
Okay.
So what he offered was, let's create this currency that just manages global finance. It's not there for domestic currency, and so we'll split up a state's domestic currency. So the American has the dollar. And then when America goes and trades globally, it'll go through the Bancor, through the banking system that way. And he had some really interesting ideas, which was like preventing someone from getting rich off the system, was that you could buy the Bancor, but you couldn't sell the Bancor. And another one was that there was a debt jubilee built into it as well. That was like after 7 years, every 7 years, there was only a max limit you could reach as a country, and then all of that money would just fall off and just get wiped off of the Excel spreadsheets.
So what's to prevent a country from just racking up a bunch of debt and trying to pull in all kinds of resources, weapons, anything of real value, and just bring as much in as they can, because they know that, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. I don't have to pay this back because it's going to get wiped off in 7 years.
Well, that's that's giving a little too much, like, I don't know, personhood to the central banking system. Think of it as if China is just buying a bunch of weapons from America, at some point America is going to stop selling them the weapons if they stop paying their debts.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
So it solves itself. What he did was on the back end build it the other way so someone couldn't hoard all the money and then become another empire, financialized empire through the system. It's actually pretty genius. And the Americans said, no, we're not doing that. We're going to be the global reserve currency, and we can guarantee safe shipping and insurance throughout the entire world. We have the largest navy. We just won World War II, or came out great, you know, and so we're going to run all of the world's money. And because everybody owes us so much money from these wars anyways in this new system, we will get them to hold their profits in our dollars. So when you owe us money, just buy federal bank deposits and reserves. And then you also need to democratize your markets. So England, the sterling, it's going to crash. You need to give us all your markets around the world so we can, you need to democratize them so we can go invest into them and take them over essentially. So then we became an empire. And one of the policies on that is called the Project for the American Century, which was published in 1952, I think by the one of the Dulles brothers, for the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a bunch of American interest businessmen who pay to generate American policy, a lot of it being American foreign policy. And then that policy goes to the politicians, and they sign it off.
These are businessmen that are essentially lobbyists.
Well, they have lobbyists. They
They
make up the ideas. They pass the idea down to a think tank. The think tank generates the policy and then puts it on the desk of the politician, and then the politician doesn't even read it, and they just sign it.
Dude. So this thing with BRICS, my assumption would be that the Keynesianism is what they're attempting to do, something along those lines, so that they don't have to use the American dollar as the denominating currency.
So they don't need Keynesianism right now. There hasn't really been any discussion on that yet. This is still premature, even though everything's moving at like lightning speed. Last year, the best people in the world at this kind of analysis would have had a hard time. They'd said, oh, this is probably going to happen in 5 years, and then it happened overnight. Things have been happening so fast. But I'll give you the basic fundamentals of what's happening. So you have BRICS, started in 2008, BRIC. In 2011, South Africa joins. They're trading. U.S. throws a coup in Brazil, and all this shit happens everywhere. So it's stunted, it's moving, it's frumpy. They're just trading in their own currencies, so they're bypassing the dollar hegemony or the SWIFT system, which is where all of the currencies flow through. So America owns the entire banking structure of global finance, where everybody has to trade in and out of. It's called the SWIFT system. And then they have two banks that lend on it, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. And those are pretty gnarly institutions themselves. But
which those are private, right? Those are...
Yeah, none of this is government owned. That's why it's kind of funny joking with a libertarian, because you're like, we're living in a libertarian's wet dream, dude, that I can't find a public bank anywhere around me, dude. You have no government-run banks. Even the Federal Reserve is private.
Yeah.
Like, this whole thing was set up by monopoly.
Yeah.
We don't have a government bank. It's a private note.
Yeah.
So
it gets confusing for the average guy because it's American money. It's American dollars. That's not ours. That's some company or some small group of people Who started the Federal Reserve?
I don't know. There's that book on Jekyll Island that I've been told to read a lot. There's a bunch of history. I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory. These people are real. They have real names. They did real things. They created real policies. They were in real old boy clubs. Jekyll Island, I'm sure, was a real thing, and the policy got created from there. Pretty normal for businessmen to get together and try to run the world, I guess. You know, it's like greed is like one of the things Michael Hudson talked about in Antiquity in the old world back then was, you know, that's what Greece, the great writers in Greece were always talking about, was somehow that greed, once it becomes addictive, you know, and that's kind of what their stories were about. It's just greed, and then collapsing. But so what BRICS is doing is, I mean, BRICS is the most fascinating thing, I'm sure, actually, we're going to talk about tonight, because it's got a little bit of everything involved in it and why it happened and what it's doing today. But essentially what happened was the Russia and Ukraine incident happened in February 21, 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. America was primed and ready for this. They instantly leveraged what Joe Biden called the mother of all sanctions. And the United States stole $632 billion from Russia. 350 of it were in global reserves, and the remaining 330 of it, or whatever, 20 of it, was in the oligarchs' assets all over the country and the world. And we had already done that with Venezuela quite a few years back. We had the World Bank, or not the World Bank, excuse me, the Bank of England just freeze their gold. It was $8 billion in gold. And then we froze their entire oil company in the United States. And I can't remember the name of the oil company, but we just took it as ours. And then through litigation, it's called lawfare. Through lawfare, we just stole it through running them through judges and then getting all of this shit worked out through law.
More like unfair.
Yeah, lawfare is pretty gnarly. It's a whole part of the thing. And then in Afghanistan, we pulled out of Afghanistan, and then we took $9 billion of Afghanistan's global reserves. And everybody's seen the SWIFT system, which was not supposed to be politicized according to Bretton Woods, which we're now into like Bretton Woods 3, version 3. But we promised the world, we're not going to politicize it. We're just going to use it for global transactions. And that's it, just a way to process money, which is a really dumb idea, to link a country's money to global finance. But we had all the money, so we thought we could run it. But it's like impossible to manage, as we've seen. All the plans don't work out. But everybody saw how we were stealing everyone's money in the last few years, and there's been a whole lot leading up to this. And so once it happened with Russia went into this entire situation because it started in 2014. There was already a coup attempt in 2004. Putin been disillusioned by the United States for quite some time, even though he was their pick into office. And Russia decided, hey, how can we prepare for going to war with America, because they're going to come after us. It's in all their policies. All the politicians say it right out in the open. They put a coup in Ukraine right on our border. 2014, like, this is it. It's called the Maidan coup. And what they did was they actually, the Russian economy got debt-free. So they went into this completely debt-free. We put all these sanctions on them, took $632 billion, and then it didn't faze them. And they weren't sure what was going to happen because they knew this was coming. Sanctions are, Noam Chomsky called them the kiss of death for a country. You can't trade anymore on the global market in whatever industry that America wants to sanction you on.
So it's leverage for...
It's full leverage. It's considered warfare because you're shutting down someone's economy and not letting them participate to trade for whatever you want, technology, food, weapons, anything you want. We're sanctioning the shit out of China right now. Over half the world is sanctioned, or like 80% of it. It's crazy. It's these are weaponized sanctions we've used. It's finance. It's weaponized finance for global empire.
Just to be able to continue to hold the power.
To keep grasping at it, keep working at it. I mean, we're going for the globe here. Like, we're going for global power. And the whole plan in the grand chessboard was keep China and Russia contained. We actually have a policies called the containment policy for China and Russia. Never let them be friends. This is what people like Kissinger knew and all these things. And then what you want to do is keep them from growing, degrowth them if you can, which is what we've done with South America and Africa, and get them to be in the least powerful position possible. You do that through financial lawfare and loans and like money. And so the world's been going through this. China's taken a backseat for a long time. They did a peaceful rise in the 80s and 90s. And to this day, and everybody saw this. It was called the mother of all sanctions. We cut Russia out of the global trade, and we told Europe to do the same thing. Hey, Europe, you're not trading with Russia anymore, even though they're your largest. You import the most from Russia of natural gas and oil and these huge commodities and resources. Like, you can't trade with them anymore. So Europe is on the sacrificial table right now, just taking it. And Russia said, okay, we knew this was coming. It's totally possible everything could collapse on the ruble side.
Rubles being the Russian currency.
And then right out the gate, India was like, hey, dude, we'll buy your oil. Whatever you're selling to Europe, we'll buy it. And Pakistan did that, and China stepped in right away, and the global south still needs everything that Russia provides, grains, everything. And so Russia went right back online after having to work out, okay, how we're going to settle these transactions, because now we don't have a bank to work inside of. So they had to rearrange their central banks to then take inflows and outflows from China and from India and from African countries and manage this kind of new system. China helped a lot with it because they were really soft with Russia. They were like, hey, let's just start working together and we'll figure it out as we go. And since they're the largest economy in the world, we have a huge buffer. So we can buy a bunch of your shit if you need it. They just all found the balance. And then throughout this time, they've now been as they were before because they had this structure, BRICS, in place since 2008. They actually had already ways to settle debts with one another. And so it just bolstered BRICS and kicked what could have taken 10 years or 20 years or 50 years for this to happen. Biden, by the Ukraine war, should get the Nobel Peace Prize because he pushed this entire system in warp speed and caused it to happen right now.
I assume that the American politicians and the people that are putting on the pressure to make these decisions, like supporting Ukraine in this war or using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia and to put sanctions on these countries, I'm assuming that they didn't know that it was going to bolster BRICS. They didn't expect that.
That's the funniest thing is the saying is America shot itself in the foot and blew its whole leg off. But it's almost looking like it blew both feet off because it's that's the sad joke of it all is dude, these people think they're all super smart and they just it's called blowback.
So then going back to the little man,
not expected any of that.
Going back to the average American's perspective, you go to this grocery store and oh shit, it costs more now. That's the result of this?
I mean, the US dollar has been rising because of it.
When you say the U.S. dollar's been rising, you don't mean the value of a dollar, do you?
No, I'm talking about like the global reserve, the global dollar. That's the trick of this whole thing. It's like the whole plan for me and you is just to keep pinching our pockets and get us to make as little as possible and just leverage out as much debt in our lifetime as we can and die just in insane amounts of debt.
Which it sounds like that's what those people in power are trying to do to all these other nations.
100%. That's what they're doing to Europe right now, is they're causing Europe to deindustrialize, and they're moving Europe's industry over to our house. That's even a quandary too, because they've deindustrialized us as a country. So how are we going to receive somebody else's industry, like physical industry? Like, we're moving German manufacturing over here. That's actually happening. We're buying out their industry for pennies because we're making the entire EU and that market just completely useless. Oil's way too expensive. Gas is way too expensive because they can't buy it from Russia anymore. And here's the joke too, is Germany's sanctioning Russian oil, but then they're buying it from India, who's buying it from Russia. So they're buying it for even more money than they would if they just buy it from Russia. But they're still buying Russian oil.
But they can't because we tell
them. And then
they're
telling all their citizens, hey, it's going to be a cold winter this year. And gas is going to be insanely high.
And they're only making that choice because America says, hey, Germany, you're not going to trade with Russia, or you're not going to buy oil from them.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it also like worked out good in America's favor, because there was a chancellor, I think is what you call it, Angela Merkel, who was like, maybe would not have let this happen. But with they call him little soldier Schultz, the person in charge of Germany. I mean, in France, Macron, I mean, these people just are all going right along with exactly what the U.S. is telling them to do. And the U.S. said, hey, don't worry about Russian natural gas. We'll sell you natural gas at 7 times the price. And the U.S. became overnight the largest exporter of LNG, tied with Qatar, last time I checked. So that's why the dollar is going up, is because, and then we're all paying more at the pump. So for us, things are getting shittier, but for them, the markets are opening up, and they're like causing the collapse of Europe. Our system is a parasitic system. So it's just looking to, there is a kind of global dominance edge to it, and we want to control everything. And then they promise everybody, we're just going to balance all the markets. Once everybody just comes into our whole system, we'll balance everything. But then they don't give a shit about that, because they'll just go harvest something out for a profit, because that's what they need to make by the end of the quarter, and fuck everything up, and then let the market just deal with it. Or, hey, the government should just print more money, and if someone else has a problem with it, we'll deal with it then later. We have the world's largest military. It doesn't matter. We'll do whatever we want. We can change the rules when we want. And BRICS is the perfect example of like legitimately fantastic speeches by Xi Jinping and Putin, and just being like, your rules-based order has no policy on paper. You've been saying rules-based order forever. If you Google it, there's nothing. It's just a made-up policy that we've been using for global control for the last 16 years, or since Afghanistan and Iraq. It was the legal precedence. Oh, this rules-based order, but there's nothing to it. It's not real, which is crazy to me when I found that out. And these people are saying we want to go back to international law. You guys don't respect international law at all. We want to live by international law. The laws are already made. Everything was built after World War II, like law-wise, and what's legal and illegal. We don't want to participate in your system anymore. We're creating our own global financial reserve so we can just trade amongst ourselves. If you want to start a war, or you don't want to participate, you want to sanction us, we'll just find a different market for that industry.
Wow. So you turn on news in America. What are they saying that is happening? What is all this what's the deception? Because obviously this is different information than we normally get?
I think right now the media is underplaying BRICS.
Oh, totally.
And saying like, oh, it's just this thing, don't worry too much about it, yada, yada, yada. But BRICS just got 6 more countries, so it's BRICS plus 6, which was Argentina, Iran, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Was it Ethiopia? There was another country. I wanted to say like Kazakhstan, but I think that's next with Algeria. So BRICS plus 6. And now the BRICS has a larger economy than the G7. And it had a larger economy than the G7 before adding 6 countries. And now the 6 countries that it's added, it has the majority oil in the world. And then next year when it gets Algeria, Venezuela, and Kazakhstan, it'll have 70% of the oil reserves in the world.
What's G7?
G7 was like, I don't know what the G stands for, but it's an organization of countries that America's been a part of for a long time. It was G6 and then G7. They added Canada to it. I'm not exactly sure who's in the G7, but I don't feel like China or any of those. I feel like those countries are in the G20. But the recent G20 meetings, Xi Jinping didn't come to, and they just completely fell apart. Like America's global meetings are falling apart everywhere they go. They did this huge meeting with Saudi Arabia, and they didn't really, I guess, come very prepared, because not long into the meeting, Saudi Arabia just took over the meeting and said, okay, let's just start talking about this now, and we're going to talk about that. And by the way, Russia's not here, so I don't know why you're trying to organize this without Russia, because they're a major player in what we're talking about. And they just took over the meeting like, I don't know, like we were the children or something.
Dude, this is like scary being an American. When
dude.
You think that your country is something specific, and you think that it's, I mean, I haven't thought this for a while, but the moral backbone of the world, I thought for a long time that America was was a moral force.
Mm-hmm.
And when you learn stuff like this, it's just like, no, man, these are people with their own self-interests.
Well, and kind of a toxic system too, if you look at that divergence, like Mike Hudson said, as the West took, a different road of holding debt. Traditionally, the world forgives debt, and actually, that's what's happening in the world today, which is China just forgave $30 billion of African debt. 2 months ago, Russia forgave $20 billion or $18 billion of African debt. And these countries know, if we hold that debt over you, there's no way you'll ever be able to industrialize. And so $28 billion is nothing to us. We'll wipe it.
At the same time, though, China's getting involved in these countries, like they're building railroads in Africa, and they're, what's the next step? Why would they they would forgive these debts so that they can move into these countries and industrialize them and take their resources, make them into communist countries, things like that, right? So it's not just like
I wouldn't say that. Here's the trick to it, is when you've grown up in that system your entire life, you just expect someone else to do the same thing. Like, that's what we would do. That's our process. That's our style. That's our policies. What I try to tell people is like, dude, people in China, from the top to the bottom, the culture, where they're from, thousands of years, one of the oldest civilizations, they think differently. Essentially, you can say China really hasn't gone to war in like 1,000 years. It's like really into trade. If you look up when they have gone to war, it's because they were like conquered by another person that used China to flex out. But they are traditionally, what Chinese people love to do is trade. And there's history of them just leaving the trade when things get violent. They just pack up and leave. Go home, find another market. The benefit to China is they have 1.4 billion people, 1.5, largest country in the world. They have an insanely complex system to manage with that many people. They are now the largest economy in the world according to purchasing power parity, which is more accurate to rate a country than GDP. But here's what's in it for them. And they made it a pretty gnarly statement in the BRICS summit in Africa just a week or two ago, which was that they said that it is our right as countries in the BRICS to let the global south develop and industrialize. And it's an obligation for us to make sure that they do that. And so the narrative is, well, China's going to go in and take over those markets. They don't want to take over the market. They're looking for stability. They love stability. So, because it's a metric. If I can get at this price for the next 10 years, I can put it into this spreadsheet, and I can run all these numbers off of it, and the price doesn't move. So that gives me 10 years of like working on numbers, and we can build our 1-year plan, our 2-year plan, our 3-year, our 5-year, our 10-year, our 20. Essentially, long story short, what they want to do is, the way the system works right now is that the United States has tried to make every country a plantation crop country, and through the World Bank, that's been its #1 thing is food first. They want to make you not make wheat, only bananas, and then you ship your bananas to this other country, they sell it on the global market and distribute it from there. And if you want wheat, you can buy it from America, or you can buy it from this country. And then we don't want you to produce that, and you make this, and you make that, and you make this, and we control all the markets. And then, by the way, if you ever talk back, you're only eating bananas for the rest of your life because we're going to cut all your fucking food.
Yeah.
And so what we've done is we have underdeveloped and kept them low in Africa and South America, and kept them underdeveloped through lawfare and financialization. And so you have countries in Africa that have the material to make aluminum, but they don't make the aluminum. The aluminum is made in another country. Why? Because if America can buy the material to make the aluminum at a penny on the dollar, and then they can go get it processed for 3 pennies on the dollar, and then once it hits the global market, it's $1 on the dollar. They've made all the profit on those chains. What China wants to do is it wants to go in, and it's already doing this. So this is not what it wants to do. It's already doing this. I watched the people who study this stuff a lot, keep tabs on Chinese presence in South Asia, the Middle East, and in Africa, and in South America. And this is what they're doing. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, we want to help you industrialize, and we want to take the product you have for aluminum and help you turn it into aluminum so you can sell it on the global market as aluminum for the market rate. And what we want out of that is we want a fixed price for 10 years on that aluminum. So we'll help you develop, and the deal is for us for a short term, 10, 20 years. I haven't heard of anything over 20. We want it at a fixed rate. No matter if the market goes up, down, tanks, this or that, we want the aluminum for this price. We guarantee we'll buy it for that price for 10 years. And as the cherry on top, we'll help you build the factories you need to take your raw material and refine it into a market item.
As I'm listening to you describe all this stuff, I'm thinking about the standard view of America toward China, or an American, my own personal view. What I hear, what I think, how what I've learned factors into my opinion and perspective of China and the relationship between America and China. And it sounds like from what you're saying that China wants stability, like financial, economic stability, and America is pushing more for domination and control.
So America is an empire.
Regardless of the stability factor in America.
What China, essentially what Xi Jinping and Putin said in a meeting sometime in 2022 was, as we were getting into this BRICS situation, because they were starting to get a lot of applications for BRICS. And you could see the writing on the wall, but people thought it would take a lot longer. But what Putin and Xi Jinping said is there's never going to be another empire in the world. No one's ever going to own everything anymore. We're going to create a new system where everybody just trades off of their own commodities. And every country's rich. They're just underdeveloped. They've been robbed. Every country has something to offer and has an ability to be on the market fairly. Like Cuba, longest embargo on a country in human history. Why don't they have the right to trade on the global market? They don't even have anything really to trade, but they're not even allowed to do imports, exports, things like that. And these major financial systems, they can't participate in the global system, but they've stayed alive for like 60 years.
That's over, though, right?
No, it's still going on. Obama dropped sanctions on Cuba, and then Trump came in and put sanctions on Cuba again. And you're like, oh, whatever, dude. These guys are all fucking just doing their own thing at the same time.
Okay.
Like, I don't even think Trump knew what he was doing. I just think he was like, sure, yeah, let's sanction Cuba if you guys say so.
Okay. I thought that was done. I thought I heard that more recently than Trump's time in office, that it was that those are gone.
I think Biden's held up. I mean, Biden is the shrewdest mother out there, dude. I mean, he is like the biggest neoliberal, neocon. Like, he doesn't care how many people suffer. He's had so many, I don't know how many lives on his hands, blood on his hands. He's just the gnarliest dude. He would sanction Cuba in a heartbeat just to.
Yeah.
Just to. You know? Yeah. Like, he's racist, dude. Like,
yeah.
That guy, yeah.
Not surprising.
Whatever faculty he has left, at least. You know?
He's not the one pulling the strings, but
right.
It's wild. Which brings me to something like BlackRock. Like, can you describe what BlackRock is?
BlackRock is the largest investment firm in the world, right? It has all the money. It has it's a monopoly. It's somehow acquired just a ton of money by telling its investors, I can make you 1% on your profit, or 2%, or 6%.
So is it a company that's privately owned that has like one dude at the top?
There's like a board of 12. That's why it's like it's like 236 people or like 200 people that run like literally like 50 or 60 trillion dollars.
Yeah.
Of like global cash.
Dude, it's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. There's so much happening that you can't even track it.
So BlackRock's like a financial arm of like the U.S. empire. It's hard to say where like the government control or BlackRock's control ends. I mean, that's the part that we just don't know. It's so opaque. But like, there's a video of Zelensky like 3 months ago when he went around, 4 months ago when he went around with hat in hand around the world to try to get a bunch of weapons for their offensive. He just says straight up, he goes, Ukraine is, going to be like one of these future cities. We're going to be the first like cashless societies in the world. He's like, we're getting great investment from companies like J.P. Morgan, BlackRock, and then he starts naming some military contractors, and they're just getting. BlackRock got the contract to rebuild Ukraine already. So, it's really just a system more than it is like the 12 guys running the board, because the thing is if you had one of those guys say, hey, this is unethical what we're doing, they'll just kick him off and put on a different person that's going to give them the yields that they're looking for at the end of the week or the 24-hour period. These systems are just how the system is created and works, and there are contradictions in it all over the place where they don't have control, where things are just going to crash, and they're just going to print more money now is the concept from 2008. So like if BlackRock crashes and it's deemed a valuable asset that can't crash, like we will just bail it out. And it's in the entire American system at this point in time is in a massive quandary. It's in stagflation. It can't lower the interest rates or it can't raise the interest rates, but it needs to prevent inflation. But if it raises the interest rates, all of its bubbles will just explode. It can't repay any of its debts, as all the countries have been seeing, and that's why they're just like, we're not even wanting to hold dollars as reserves anymore. And the entire thing is like financial speculation at the top of just gambling. It's just straight up like what happened in 2008 was like they invited the world into their gambling and were selling off all of those packaged mortgages to the world, and so it kind of broke out of its little US like tightly controlled hegemonic bubble in Wall Street that they wouldn't let anybody participate in, where all the gambling was going on. And then they opened it up to the world. It instantly crashed everything. And then now the cat's out of the bag. The global's into this speculation, but they're not wanting to really participate anymore. And these companies have to make these pretty impressive profits at percentages that they can't make it. They have nowhere to put the money to make them that kind of money, which is another contradiction. Capitalism, if you borrow at 2%, you're going to want to make 3% on it, or 4%. And then if I borrow from you at 3%, or the interest is moving around like that, if you borrow something at which is what led to this entire thing, is in the 80s, the Volcker shock therapy, the Fed interest was at 20%. And it slowly went down through the 90s, but it was at 20%, which is at 6. It's at 6 now, which is pretty gnarly. But it was at 20%. So like people are, so the markets completely froze back then, and, or not the markets, but like the bond market, and then they slowly started lowering it. So people were borrowing at 15% and or 13%, and they needed to make money on 13%. So what they were going in to make money on was businesses that had a higher bond yield of 13% they could make an interest on. And then they were doing these crazy like borrowing the entire money to buy the business. And the way they were borrowing it was just for stocks and bonds, and they only had to put 5% down on the business. And then the business was like, oh, we're getting bought out by this huge company. Their stocks went up 20%. And they would instantly own all those stocks and then repay the money they'd spot. So there was just billionaires being created overnight. And it created a system where it got truly parasitic and truly financialized, which it just was companies eating other companies and liquidating them, selling off all of their assets. And now there's just so much money flooded into the market. There's not a lot of places to make those kinds of yields and profits, so it's hitting its peak. Especially with BRICS de-dollarizing. Like, the one thing I don't understand is like China made a deal with BlackRock a year ago, but I'm not sure if they're just trying to be friendly with America, because America's like, we're going to invade you. And so they're like, oh, we'll open some of our private markets to BlackRock, and then it's good diplomacy because you are letting the largest investor play ball with you, so it's creating relationships. And Chinese are great diplomats, all about relationships. Well, maybe if we can be friends with BlackRock, we can convince Biden not to bomb us in Taiwan. You know, I don't know why China dealt with BlackRock, because basically everybody knows it's a parasitic system, and it has nothing to do with what we consider, what we think the market does, which is like oil. How much is being traded per barrel? How much does that affect the economy? With U.S. financialization, it's moved it all off of commodities, so like, and resources. So the wealth isn't even being made off of like, I don't know, like even oil anymore almost. Or like, I guess when it comes down to it, you know, you try to soak a country like Russia and they have real things to sell. And there's like the real economy. They have real oil, they have real gas, they have real food, they have real precious minerals. And people want to buy them. And, you know, moving from gold to fiat was to get us off of gold so we could keep our gold and move us on to a digital system, no asset system, but we actually made the asset Saudi oil. And we did that long before, but we actually floated our GDP, then the value off of it, off Saudi oil. And we let the OPEC countries sell for whatever price they wanted to. We didn't care if it created a gas crisis in our country or how much it soaked our economy. Sell for anything you want. The deal is, though, whatever profits that you make off of your exports have to be invested in the American either stock and bond market at not any major ownership, real estate, or federal bonds. And so there was like a time when like every sheik was buying. There was a time where like sheiks were buying $1 million of every stock on the S&P, like just putting all their money. Even Japan was. We're this major. I mean, we're kind of going backwards now, but this didn't get explained. Is our system works off of holding debt and leveraging that debt, and then the IOUs will never repay.
Right. Which is why we have to do things like drop Tower 7 during 9/11 and destroy the financial records that are being held internationally.
Yeah, right. We're the ones creating all the speculative bubbles and the bubbles because we're just keep giving money to people at the top who do nothing real to change the economy one way or another. They're just making billions or trillions off of money laundering, or like getting money out of the government and into their bank account. So let's have the Fed under the CARES Act and Trump, we did $6 trillion. And like, you know, that all went to BlackRock. Steve Mnuchin put BlackRock in charge of distributing the money.